Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to the Football Diary podcast. Erik Ten Hag has been sacked by Manchester United. I'm not going to take great glee in that, really. It's always sad when a manager loses his job. But blimey, it's about time, isn't it? And you've got two Manchester United fans on the pod today to discuss the reaction to that news and what happens next for Manchester United going forward. And yeah, the timing of the decision. What does that mean? Why now? So many questions left unanswered. But me and Dave will be talking about that first, of course. And then with whatever time we've got left after that massive conversation, we'll go through the Premier League's action this week, including obviously the big game between Arsenal and Liverpool, Leicester versus Forest, as Forest climb to 6th, and Brentford 4, Ipswich 3, one of the most entertaining games so far this season. But Dave, your initial reaction, first of all, because we've delayed our recording of the podcast this week just from circumstance, really. And turns out it was the right decision because this Ten Hag news came through literally a couple of hours ago. And yeah, it's a bit of a shock, but not so much, really. How are you feeling, mate?
I feel a bit of deja vu, as I feel probably a lot of United fans can relate, probably over the last, decade, 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
When
that 3-year cycle.
Sacked a new manager that have lasted around a couple of years, and we're going through this whole cycle again. I mean, you can't be surprised in some ways at the decision. I mean, you look at his record this season, even going back to actually quite a chunk, especially at the end of last season when I think a lot of fans expected him to leave in the summer, especially if we lost that FA Cup final. It almost seems like that's what kept him in the job.
100%.
To be honest, a bit of relief, but more down to, I hope it just lets the shackles off some of these players a little bit. It almost feels like sometimes when you're watching these games, there's just too much information drilled into them, and it's almost, I think, a little bit overwhelming.
I feel the opposite. I feel like they've been a bit aimless. Like they're not sure what the instructions are, not clear. And there's some actual, real world-class quality players there who've played under some world-class coaches. And I feel like sometimes they've just had to make it up as they go along. That's not a great sign either. But yeah, 128 games as Manchester United manager, a 56% win record, which isn't bad. But it's more the recent history that's been the most shocking, isn't it, for Ten Hag? No win in Europe for a year, 14th in the Premier League as we record. And it's just not acceptable. And I think the highest of highs under Ten Hag has been great. There's been some real moments where some players have been nurtured and come through. Obviously, the cup wins stand out. That FA Cup win was superb. But 4 wins from 14 games this season is just not good enough, is it, Dave? And every passing game since the Spurs game especially, I thought this must be it. How much more time does he need to be given? What are we waiting for? So what do you think Ineos were waiting for?
It's difficult. I think since that game, I definitely think there's been talks with other potential candidates, other managers going on in the background, because you're looking at the back of that result and the performance itself, and even other performances earlier on this season. Surely there can't have been, there had to be alarm bells ringing in there.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, and let's not be silly and saying, that they will just be acting as though everything's fine. The statement coming out of the club is that there's calm and resolve there and they are fully backing the manager. They expect an improvement in results and performances, and I just think it was ultimately leading to this. Obviously, the timing is strange because we've just had an international break that's just gone. Almost feels like the last 2 or 3 games have been kind of a bit of a waste of time, really, because we've just ambled through those fixtures.
Yeah,
and now we're in a position now where I think we've got 5 or 6 more games now until the next international break. And obviously our next league game is against Chelsea at the weekend, which is obviously by no means a straightforward fixture. So
really odd timing.
It's strange timing, but better late than never, I suppose.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think what you said with the FA Cup win as well, I feel like that was the right time to say goodbye. From Ten Hag's point of view, like obviously he's received a reported somewhere between 15 and 20 million pound payoff or something for being sacked. But money aside, like from a point of pride, I think he could have walked out after that cup final with his head held pretty high, with the record still relatively good and positive, and with 2 trophies to his name. And he could have probably landed a pretty good job after the summer somewhere else, a pretty good side. But now his reputation's kind of been damaged a little bit more. United have taken further steps back as if we didn't even think that was possible, really, at the end of the season. So I don't know why he signed a contract or why he was given a new contract in the summer. What was Ineos's game plan here? I know they were keen to give him like a trial run with this new setup above him. And obviously he's been given the players that he really wanted. But Miles called it quite early from game one against Fulham. Like, nothing's changed. Like, the problems still existed all over the pitch, didn't they? The system never changed with the personnel.
No, and that's another thing. We've obviously recruited some of these new players in with the idea of playing under this manager as well. We've recruited the likes of Andre Onana, Alessandro Martinez, of the idea of playing out from the back and playing in the style of Ten Hag. But I don't think we ever really identified a style under him, to be honest. It was really difficult to see what we were trying to do at times. And we were caught in two minds of playing this, this transitional football where we're trying to move it quickly out, but also pressing on the front foot. But we're opening these massive gaps and leaving ourselves vulnerable to counter-attack time and time again.
Yeah.
And I think you had to look at that at the back end of last season and look at the amount of shots we were having on our goal. It would have been a similar sort of exit, I think, to Louis van Gaal when he left. Obviously, went on the back of an FA Cup final win, and that would have been the perfect time for them to kind of identify their candidate. I mean, you look at some of the managers that have been there actually over the last few months, the likes of Thomas Tuchel, who I'm sure would have been interested in this job, and there's no secrets there that they spoke to him in the summer about potentially coming in. It doesn't seem like we're the most well prepared, but hey, what do we know? That there could be something brewing. I think there's something that's literally just come out and breaking news that United are apparently talking to Ruben Amorim.
Yeah.
Which is a fascinating one. I think this afternoon he was obviously interviewed in one of his press conferences for Sporting, and they basically asked him whether he'd be interested in the potential vacancy, and he almost came prepared as if he knew it was coming.
That.
And I don't think the news had been out long at all. And I think his answer was that I anticipated this question. So it was almost as though he was expecting it. So maybe there's obviously been talks there. So it's exciting. It's exciting in a way, but it's tiring. It's just tiring because it feels like we've been through this over and over. And what manager is the right answer? That's the question.
You say that, Dave, but there are some elements of Ten Hag's reign where I feel like there are some kind of positives, and you've got to kind of say thank you to him for them. So he did instill a level of organisation, I think, in the dressing room, and obviously after the mess that he came from, like Ralph Rangnick, especially on the tail end of his time, it was just a broken, fractured dressing room. Obviously, there were challenges with Cristiano Ronaldo, with Jadon Sancho, but I think he dealt with them fairly authoritarianly, which is kind of what you need from the manager. So he's been pretty clear about the way he wants his dressing room to be. However, on the pitch, I can't see any evidence of coaching or training happening. And, obviously when Unai Emery is the prime example of changing a coach to be a coach and to get the best out of the players available, when he came into Villa, you saw that within 3-4 games, they were playing a certain way. And every passing game with Ten Hag, I was like, well, what are we doing now? What's his identity? And I still don't know what it is. This last game, weirdly, against West Ham, we lost 2-1, and I think we were really unlucky. And that's the irony of this sacking, is that we played all right. Some of the passing interplay going forward was great. And it's just wasteful forward play that kind of cost us really quite dearly, and obviously bad refereeing in the end. But we're always our own worst enemies, aren't we, in these situations? But it actually wasn't Ten Hag's fault, really, this game. So why he's gone now is odd after that game, when there were so many worse games coming leading up to that. But yeah, I think Ten Hag's style was never really clearly defined. And then you can obviously beat him with the stick of how much money is spent on players under his tenure. It's a lot of money. And the players that have been signed, I've got to say, are mostly quite good. There's some players there who I'm really optimistic about, especially from this window. And I think they are definite ones to build on for the future. So, yeah, there's some positives that have happened under him. But the biggest one for me, I don't know about you, is just the signing of Anthony. The amount of money we've thrown at that guy and the amount that he's given on the pitch, it's just so minimal. The return on investment for him, somebody he really trusted and actually stubbornly stuck to in the last few games as well, when Ahmad was on the bench, having played brilliantly at the start of the season. It's just some of these decisions that he made, I just couldn't fathom them. And I think that didn't help for him either, did it?
Mazraoui in the 10 as well.
Yeah, what the hell? Why experiment then?
In the Europa League, there's been some strange ones, hasn't there? And yeah, it makes you feel for, like, I felt for Ahmad actually in that game, because it almost felt like he was surely going to be slotted into that position.
And Rashford as well,
And
when he
obviously,
went
and
through
then
as
there
well.
was the bigger punch to the gut, really, that Anthony came on before him, and obviously he got suffered. Anthony came off injured. There's been some bizarre ones, but there's a lot of things. And I think particularly Anthony's price tag. You can't put it all down to Ten Hag. At the end of the day, he's probably suggested him as an option, and the club have said, and obviously this is when Ineos weren't in the picture. And you look at some of the prices we paid actually this window, been a lot more sensible. You look at the 65 million we spent on Mason Mount in the last year of his contract, the 90 million we spent on Anthony. There's been just so much wasted finances, hasn't there? And I don't think you can entirely blame Erik ten Hag for that. But you can question some of the players that we've brought in, I think, while he's been here. Not everyone's been a success. And can you say that he's used them to the best of their abilities? Has he improved a lot of these players either? It doesn't really feel like there's been many individuals that have done really well. Obviously, Marcus Rashford, I think in his first season was, absolutely exceptional year, probably the best year he's ever had. But there's nobody who's really come to the fore that I can think of. Diogo Dalot's probably been a little bit better, although he's had a couple of shocking games in the last week or so.
He's improved. Garnacho, I think, has improved. Obviously, Mainoo's had a chance and probably been overused as well. That's another thing he's been guilty of, is relying on some players far too much. Bruno Fernandes as well. He's been consistent throughout. But yeah, I think the Ten Hag era has been tarnished by so many lows. Like some of the defeats we've suffered during his time, like thrashings at the hands of like Liverpool and City, and teams coming to Old Trafford and getting their first win in like 50 years or something because of just how passive we are. And it's a sign of how far we've fallen, Dave, when we look at each game each weekend and we think, oh, it's Crystal Palace at home. Oh, I don't know about that one. And every single game that comes up, you just think, actually, we could easily lose that on the form we're in. And that felt like it every match week. And that's just stressful and draining for a United fan, isn't it?
That's almost relegation form, isn't it?
It is,
every team you're facing every single week, you've got, real doubts over whether you're even going to get a point, let alone a win, have the chances of a win. Yeah. I think it speaks volume of the pit that we found ourselves in at the minute.
And this trust the process stuff as well. Every time we had a little bit of a false dawn, we'd win 1 or 2 in a row or have a great performance or a cup final win. And you think, oh, is this the process happening? And then the next week you're like, nope, definitely not. And we could see 2 late equalisers or something like that in a row, or that's happened so many times, hasn't it? But before we talk about the future and what happens next, Miles couldn't make it onto the pod this week, but he left us his comments straight after the news broke, and here's what he had to say about the Ten Hag sacking.
Hey guys, apologies, couldn't be on the pod this week, but couldn't miss the opportunity to send my condolences to every football fan in England outside of the red half of Manchester for the loss of Erik ten Hag. I think I speak for all of us when we say he should have been given longer. I'm certain that if he'd been given the time, that by next season he would have been making a charge for the title and promotion back to the Premier League for certain. But I imagine actually a lot of Man United fans are dancing on the ceiling over this. And to their credit, for the longest time, they backed him. And over the summer when it was talked about him getting that renewal, a lot of them said that was okay and they tried to support him, but you can just see the writing's been on the wall for so long. The performances are terrible. There's such a lack of a tactical approach, and the attitude that he has towards the media, his selection choices, it just spelt out the end for so long. And I'm interested to see what they do next, but it's not a good look for Ineos. I mean, you boys have been saying for ages on the pod about how it's more about the way the club's run than the manager. You got these new people in that are supposed to take over and drive in the right direction, and they've backed the manager, spent heavily with him, and then removed him by October. So can't wait to see Southgate in the dugout. It's interesting to see what it is. Also, quick message to say, you're probably not going to talk about Villa this week. Bit of a boring result of the weekend, but let's not let a week on the pod go without mentioning that we are top of the Champions League. Thank you very much. Best team in Europe. You can keep your hands off Unai Emery, Man United fans.
So yeah, obviously Miles is quite opinionated about Ten Hag. I think he jokes there in his clip about how like rival fans are going to be quite sad to see him go. And you can kind of see why to an extent, because he kind of opened the door for a lot of teams to think, yeah, we can have a go at Manchester United. So that begs the question, Dave. Obviously, Ruud van Nistelrooy's stepping in now. We don't know how long for. I'm guessing until they've found a suitable candidate as quickly as possible. There's some talk about him maybe staying till the end of the season just to steady the ship, which I can't see would be a bad thing. I mean, when Solskjaer was an interim manager, he did really well just on pure vibes, didn't he? The mistake we made was handing him the job full time because he's not a coach, not a proven coach. I think we need a proven coach. Who that is, I'm really open to suggestion, because I don't necessarily care about a world-class name. I just want somebody with the right kind of like no-nonsense kind of approach to just people being stupid in the dressing room, but also a tactical vision and plan that they can stick to, but then also in game go, this ain't working, and change it. Who that is, I don't know, but out of the people that have been mentioned, is there any coaches that you're looking at and going, yeah, maybe?
I think there's probably 2 or 3 that I'd say probably outstanding shortlisted names on there. I think probably Nagelsmann, who I think they have actually tried for in the summer. I think they've spoken to him and said he obviously wants to kind of finish his stay at Germany and obviously be there for the next World Cup. So I think he's out of the running. Amorim, I think, is another promising one. And obviously there's mentions of Thomas Frank. I don't know whether I can see it myself. I think he's very obviously untried at the very top level in terms of the elite clubs.
Yeah.
But I think he's the longest serving manager, or one of the most longest serving managers in the Premier League as well, which I think speaks volume about how well he's done and the consistency that he's brought there at Brentford. But from what I've been reading, it looks like we're really interested in Amorim, and whether that is because we've had assurances over Nagelsmann and that he's kind of not going to be moving anywhere for the next, the foreseeable, then we've gone with him. I think it's good in a way that we're looking to be decisive and we're not looking to follow this interim route again. We've gone down that path with Solskjaer, we've gone down it with Rangnick, and there was some turbulence along the way. Let's just say that.
Well, that's the thing I want to kind of get my head around, is if United bite the bullet now and go, yeah, we're going for Amorim, for example, we'll tempt him away from Sporting because of the project that's on offer. And I think it is an attractive project still, because United can't sink much lower, and the players they've got, I think it's a really good squad. It's the best squad we've had in a long time. The pieces just need to be put in the right place, and there needs to be a obvious tactical direction on the pitch. Amorim might be that guy. And I think he sounded quite coy in his press conference today, but I think I honestly can see him visualising himself in that role, which is a good start. And I think there's a few managers and coaches who would look at this job and go, yeah, this is a step up that I think can't really go wrong. Ten Hag obviously came in at a time, I think, when things were pretty bad. It probably wasn't the right job for him right then. I don't think he's a bad coach, but I think Amorim is coming in at a good time if he does come in. Thomas Frank, I just like him too much to take this job. I don't want him to leave Brentford. I think we'll talk about Brentford in a moment, but he's such a nice guy and such a likeable coach, and that place is perfect for him. The Brentford community that they have there just really thinks he's great, and even at the lowest kind of ebbs in the Premier League, they've never really wavered in their support for Frank, and I think he thrives on that. I think he's even mentioned how happy he is, and that a top big job wouldn't necessarily tempt him away because of the prestige. It's happiness he's kind of looking for, and I feel like that's what he's got there. So yeah, I don't want to go for Frank because I feel like it might destroy him like it has previous coaches. But Amorim seems attractive.
He's got 2 great hair as well. I think we'd be losing that in an instance at United.
What, from a baldy to flowing locks? Bit of a change in the dressing room. But I don't know. I feel like, you think about the kind of coach you want with your team, and whether it's somebody that's going to be a really good man manager who puts an arm around a player and support. And we said Pochettino might have been that kind of coach if he'd have been in the job. Or do you want a disciplinarian or a tactician or an Enzo Maresca type serious figure on the touchline? Honestly, don't know. I really don't know. We've tried a bit of everything over the years, haven't we? I think I just want a coach fundamentally who knows player strengths, knows how to get the best out of them in which positions, and to flex tactically in game. And I know that sounds like I'm asking for a lot, but I think just doing those bare minimum things will get results fairly quickly. Maybe that's me just being optimistic.
I think to come in and just put your imprint on this squad and this team, and as to visually be able to see that,
Yeah.
As fans, I think that will be a great start. It's going to take a bit of time, obviously, and it's not great timing at all if they are looking to bring somebody in now. I think Amorim, I think he's got a release clause at the end of the season. I think I read that apparently it'll be a 10 million euro buyout if we do look to get him midway through the season, which it doesn't sound too...
Go for it, yeah.
It doesn't sound too much, to be honest, when you put it that way. But it's always going to be difficult this time of the season. It's whether he thinks he can come in and get a tune out of them, I suppose, straight away.
Let's go straight into the Arsenal-Liverpool game, Dave, and something that could be considered, I guess, a title clash of sorts. But after this draw, the only real winners really were Man City, weren't they, really?
I think you could see it as that way. I think of what I thought was actually quite a promising sort of first 25 minutes, half an hour, it was shaping up to be like a real exciting game, and it's kind of really kind of dropped off a little bit of a cliff, and especially in the second half. I think some of that you can put down to how Arsenal actually approached that second half. I think the first half they played really well. They actually found pockets in between that Liverpool defence and midfield
really well.
Terrifically well. I thought Hag SACKED really caused them problems for the majority of that first half, and obviously took his goal brilliantly. It was great to actually see him fit for this game, because obviously there were doubts, wasn't there, over his fitness.
Oh, he looked great. I thought he looked great physically.
And obviously, with some of their injury problems at the minute, Arsenal, I thought they made a good account of themselves, I think, particularly in that first half. But Liverpool, we know what they're like. Obviously, with some of the players, they've got the match winners. The experience heads, you forget how experienced some of their players are, the likes of Mo Salah, Virgil van Dijk. Coming to the fore again and literally just pulling it back for them. I think Arsenal will be a little bit wounded by this result, because I think they would have felt they were in a position to win the game, and it almost felt like they didn't quite take advantage of in the moments where they were really on top. It felt like at times when they were 1-0 up, they could have gone on and probably scored again and put it out of sight.
It's weird because there weren't that many clear-cut chances, and I think the expected goals for each was about 1. So a draw, I think, on the face of it was probably fair. But the first half, you're right, I thought Arsenal were superb off the ball, especially. Like the amount of times they created space by players pulling defenders out of position, and Kai Havertz dropped deep so many times, and I don't think anyone knew what to do with him, and it just left so much space for like Saka to run in behind. So they've been really smart with being, I don't know, really careful about what they do off the ball in order to test teams and who's going to mark who. And it asks so many questions of Liverpool in the first half. And I thought Andy Robertson had a really poor game. I think he's struggled this season so far. And they took him off, obviously, after, I think, at like an hour. And that changed the game, I think, in the second half for Liverpool, when they took off him and a couple of others and brought on like Szoboszlai and Gakpo and Tsimikas instead. They seem to have a different shape and a different attacking impetus. And fair play to Slot, really, for identifying that. And the game didn't look dead and buried at 2-1 down. It always looked like they had a chance. And you've kind of got to say about Arsenal as well, their injury problems now. I think Timber and Gabriel, wasn't it, both got injured in this game. Their defence is looking a little bit more makeshift lately as well. And that's going to be an issue for them. Obviously, Saliba was suspended for this game, but he's back now. But losing 2 of those players, and Calafiori as well is not there, is going to be an issue for Arsenal, isn't it?
I think they'll probably be desperate to get to the international break again.
I know.
It sounds
limping
crazy
over the line.
It feels like we've literally just had one. It's really unfortunate for them, isn't it? And I think, especially players like obviously Timber, Calafiori's had some real problems early on in his career. These are real talents. You want to see them playing most weeks if they can. And I think with that, if you look at that Arsenal team, it's crazy to think actually they're having problems in that defence, because they've got some. It's not exactly a thin back line. They've got options in there. It's just that they've had such rotten luck with it all. But I think navigating these next few weeks up until the international break will be a key for them. Really, I don't think it was a bad point, to be honest, against this Liverpool team. I think there were a lot of. Obviously, there was a lot of talk before saying, Liverpool really should be beating this Arsenal team, and I think they've done themselves proud to go on and get a decent result.
Yeah, I think out of the 2 teams involved, I think Liverpool probably feel the more positive, because they've only dropped points, I think, to Forest so far this season before this game. And it was their first real test, I think, under Slot, because they've had quite an easy start to the season on paper. Obviously, the Premier League's a difficult league, but they've been tested, but not as much as this game. So to come back twice, I think, is a real testament to Liverpool's resolve. I guess the challenge for Arsenal is to not fall away, because, I mean, they've drawn 3 games out of 9 this season. That's what's really cost them in the league. And losing points in draws is kind of one of those things that really loses momentum in a title race. And they've got to hope, really, that they don't fall away or fall into a habit, I guess, by having a depleted backline. But Liverpool, on the other hand, Salah again, a game changer. Really fantastic performance from him and a great finish to equalise for the second equaliser. They look in good form, Liverpool, don't they? And I think after this test, they must be quite buoyant too. Still in second, of course, and probably on momentum, probably closest to City, you'd say.
I think it was a real off day for probably the attacks on both teams, with the exception of Mo Salah and Saka.
Salah did miss a sitter, actually, at one point in the first half. So, it could have been a different narrative for him. But yeah, he's always coming up clutch this season,
I think
isn't he?
one play you probably got to give a lot of credit for. Darwin Núñez, the way he set up Salah's goal. Actually, the weight of the pass was perfect.
And Trent's ball into him.
He's probably not the strongest areas of his game, really. That kind of play around the box and the final pass, that final bit of quality. But I thought he did tremendously well to set him up. And I think that was where the game was lacking a little bit, to be honest, in quality in those areas. But we saw it, in a couple of moments, that a little bit of magic from Saka, the first goal. And then obviously Salah, the finish was, emphatic. But I don't know if there's... I just think this Liverpool attack, I think that sets them apart from Arsenal. I think on their day, I just think they're a lot better. I think they're a lot more clinical. I think there's more experience there.
More depth as well.
I just think, there's more depth. And I think Arsenal are just lacking a little bit on that front line. I'm still not sure about Gabriel. I think Martinelli just needs to do far more for me. I think they lack a little bit on that left-hand side. If Trossard's in there, one of them needs to step up, because, Saka can't be doing it every week. Havertz has gone through a little bit of a dry spell of late. So they need to be stepping up and making their mark, because they need to be scoring goals.
But credit to Arsenal's set play coach again, once again, coming up good with the goods, as they score yet another set-piece goal. And I think right at the end of this game, you could see the ball almost went out for a corner. Probably should have been with like a minute to go, but they ruled it as a goal kick, and they were furious because they knew that if they had a corner, they'd got such a good chance of getting a winner. So Arsenal have been great in areas like that where the going gets tough. I think they've been compared to like a Rolls-Royce version of Stoke City back in the day, because of how pragmatic they are at finding a way to win and not being defeated. But yeah, I think Liverpool were just too good for them in this game. They were almost their equal.
Quick one on the disallowed. Well, nothing was really made of it in the game at the time, but obviously there was a goal that Gabriel Jesus scored, and looking back, it doesn't actually look like there was a lot wrong. The referee blew up for...
Was it the one right at the very end of the game you're talking about?
Yeah, it was quite very up towards the end of the game. I think it was Kiwior basically jumps up and kind of goes over a Liverpool player, but the Liverpool player has no intention of challenging for the ball. And I think that's what he blew up. I don't think there was anything really else that was going wrong.
No, it wasn't mentioned, was it? Like, the reason behind it wasn't actually clear, but...
No, there's been a lot on social media over it. But if you just look at it, it just looks so soft. And what's strange is that the Liverpool... There's almost like everyone kind of stops as well in the game. Like, there's a little bit of hesitancy, I think, over like what's happening. But for me, I think that should have been a goal. I don't think there was anything wrong with it. It was really scrappy, and you don't want a goal like that to be winning a game.
Well, we've just talked about United, and we haven't even mentioned the penalty given against them and the disgraceful VAR decision against Matthias de Ligt as well. Like, what the hell was that about? Like, it's not been a good week for officials, really, has it? But we say that most weeks, it feels like. It's mad. I'm not going to go into United again, but let's move on to another team flirting with the top 6 this season, Dave. In fact, they are 7th, I think, at the time of recording. That's Nottingham Forest. Flipping Nottingham Forest. Flying high in the Premier League, so far away from relegation trouble that it must be refreshing to be a Forest fan at the minute, because, their good players are actually all producing for them. And even their so-called backup players are producing the goods too. Chris Wood turning into prime on this season. Like his goal scoring contributions in this season, I think, are just phenomenal. I think he's only behind like Cole Palmer and Erling Haaland in terms of goals in the last X amount of games, which is mad. But yeah, Forest beating Leicester away 3-1. Obviously, that result in isolation is great for Forest. Steve Cooper, obviously, that factor coming in has made it even sweeter. But on its own, Forest just played really, really well. Obviously, no Morgan Gibbs-White in this game, but Elliot Anderson deserves some praise for how well he stepped up in that role. Obviously, I've mentioned Wood, and his finishing has been superb. Everything's going so well for them in the minute.
Yeah, another player I thought you mentioned earlier, who probably doesn't get many plaudits, and I think he's seen as a little bit of a villain. Some Forest fans, I think, debate whether he should actually be in the team some weeks, but Ryan Yates, I thought, took his goal superbly. And actually, I think that's probably one of the best games I've seen him have for Forest.
Yeah,
he's not the most pleasing player to see on the ball, and he's not got the technique as some of those players they've got in midfield. But I thought he really kind of put his imprint on that game, and particularly the second half. I thought Forest played really well, managed the game really well. I thought the first half was they struggled a little bit actually. And I think Leicester actually were a much better side for much of that first half. But I just think it seems like their management of their games has improved massively, I think, this season.
Yeah.
And they've definitely stemmed the flow of goals from going in. Defensively, I think they've improved massively. And a lot of fans have put that down to Milenkovic, and that partnership has gotten
him and Murillo.
They seem to complement each other so well. And I think they've got options in there, like you mentioned. Morgan Gibbs-White started on the bench for this game, and it's happened a few times this season where I think Anthony Elanga and Callum Hudson-Odoi have started on the bench, and they've started with more of a narrow midfield where they've been able to manage the game a little bit better against some of the bigger teams, I think, that are going to probably dominate the game a little bit more. So I think they've got different ways of playing. I think Nuno's doing a really good job there with that set of players.
There's a lot of Nottingham Forest fans, I think, and probably us as well, who are kind of eating a bit of humble pie. I think after the criticism he got at the end of last season for, I guess, not turning around some very obvious flaws in Forest's defence, especially, that seems to have been addressed this season. He is rather, really tactically kind of diverse now. I think he's shown his flexibility even in this game by shuffling the midfield the way he did. And don't forget, they had, I think, James Ward-Prowse on the bench as well. So, there's a few midfielders he could have picked instead, but this seemed to work really well against Leicester.
They're still missing players as well, the likes of Danilo.
Of course, yeah. He was out for a long time, isn't he, as well? But yeah, I think he deserves a bit of praise, Nuno Espirito Santo, I think, for the way this season in particular, he's stayed optimistic. I think that's one of his big strengths and always has been, is that he's just a warm, genteel, kind of encouraging character. And I think that's really worked for Forest this season. But not only that, when the going gets good, it seems to be made better by the fact that he's just really cheerleading his team so well. And you listen to him after the match. Whenever it's a defeat, he seems to not really take it too hard. But whenever it's a victory like this, especially against a local rival like Leicester, he was so proud of his players, and rightly so. And I think they reciprocate that. It's a good relationship so far. And I think the kind of feeling towards Forest for getting rid of Cooper so ruthlessly in some fans' eyes seems to be kind of vindicated a bit now. Do you think that's fair to say?
I think so. This isn't over the course of, this has not been 2 or 3 games now. It's been 10 games in the Premier League, and I think at the end of Friday they were 5th in the Premier League, which is crazy.
Brilliant.
So I think they've done really well. I think there's some consistency in there that you can see throughout the game. There's a real mixture of player profiles in there. There's a nice blend of youth, but there's some experience in there. They've brought the likes of James Ward-Prowse in there, who's an experienced head in this league. It can really, I think a lot of young players can lean upon. Chris Wood, like you mentioned, it just looks reborn. I mean, for much of it last season, obviously, when 1 year wasn't available as well. But I think that particularly his first goal, you don't see many goals like that now.
Really good.
I used to love seeing strikers finishing almost such an a difficult angle to strike the ball, but then able to finish like in the far corner like that. You just don't
Not
see
only
many
that, Dave, but
goals.
the third goal, the header, the looping header over the goalkeeper, that takes some control to header it with the right amount of strength. And obviously, Wout Fass obviously messed that up anyway to begin with and kind of handed it to him on a plate. But it's still got so much to do. But the calmness and confidence he finished both his goals. It shows how much of a rich vein of form he's in the minute. Yeah. And you were saying, you reminded me before we recorded that he's a former Leicester player, which I kind of almost completely forgot because he was a bit anonymous for Leicester, wasn't he? It's probably when they were in the Championship as well. But yeah, no muted celebrations from Wood, but I don't blame him, to be fair. Like, he owes Leicester nothing and played so
He's at the back
well.
end of his career. You know,
Yeah.
you don't know how many years he got left at the very top, and performing at this level, which is probably going to be his,
Yeah.
richest fame of form is probably going to see now until at least at this top level. I think that he'll probably go on and play in the Championship and down the leagues later on in his career.
Yeah.
Just take the moments in, I suppose.
Yeah, real rejuvenation from him and from Forest this season. And we were talking about the importance of Tayo Awoniyi, weren't we, last season, and how big he was for Forest. Yeah, it doesn't look like he's been missed much at the minute. But yeah, well played Forest, up to 7th in the league. Let's talk about Brentford 4, Ipswich 3, shall we, Dave? Because probably one of the most entertaining games of the season so far. It had literally so many different dimensions to it. Some poor defending, some great finishing. I think Ipswich can feel a little bit aggrieved as well because they finished their goals superbly. Liam Delap again had a great game. But Brentford and that man, Thomas Frank, as well. We talked about him earlier and the effect he has on this Brentford team. I think the players in that team is kind of a reflection of him. There's so many individual players there that aren't superstars, but are just very, very good at what they do. Brian Mbeumo is a case in point. He's improved so much under Thomas Frank, and I think he was like the star of the show for this game and for this season so far for Brentford, wasn't he?
Yeah, he's definitely stepped up, hasn't he? I think since Ivan Toney's has left, and he's stepped up in a similar sort of style. I think if you look at his penalty kicks,
that's a flex, isn't it? Yeah. The style.
There's a definite similarity there, I think, with Ivan Toney's style of penalty taking. And I'm sure he's probably sending him a few messages saying there's a new penalty king in town. But yeah, I think this game in particular, what a roller coaster. Honestly. And okay, there's mistakes been littered, I think, throughout this game defensively, and I think that's what you can come to expect when you play in Ipswich at the minute. But Brentford, I think you've got to give them a lot of credit with the goals that they're scoring, the creating opportunities. I think Keane Lewis-Potter actually over the last few weeks has played really well as well, and starting to fit into this side quite nicely. But yeah, I just some of the goals. I think let's start with Ipswich. I think 20 goals they've conceded this season, second most in the league. And you look at some of that defending, and you can see why it's happening. And I think Brentford just took full advantage in those, particularly the first couple of goals. It just seemed like they really struggled to follow their markers, Ipswich, and they identified that massively. You look at Visser, like finding movement in between, behind those lines. I thought he did it superbly and took his 2 goals really well. But Ipswich did not do themselves any favours. And you've got to feel sorry for one man in particular, haven't you?
What a game for him. Yeah, Clark, sent off, own goal. Yeah, it was like a bit of a Jonathan Woodgate Real Madrid type debut, wasn't it? It was his debut too, which is like...
Full Premier League debut.
Full debut, yeah. It's a game to forget for him. But yeah, he was kind of symbolic, I think, of the defensive frailties of Ipswich, and they need to sort that out. And we said that at the start of the season, that for all of Ipswich's attacking positives, and there are plenty, like even Sammy Smodics with his goal to open the scoring was fantastic. Liam Delap's such a talent. Even Calvin Phillips had a decent game as well by his current recent standards. It's just that defensive lack of quality that's letting them down.
Brentford's first goal was it showed you everything you need to know about Ipswich defending at the minute. How they managed to escape free on that left-hand flank is beyond me. There's about 4 players trying to chase him back, a Brentford player, and then comes into the box. The centre-back decides to come over when he's got 2 players behind him, and poor Leif Davis is there, left on his own. In a 2v1 situation, and we know what happens if Visser finishes it off, comfortably. But I just think some of their decision making in games and the way they look at particular situations, I think in games is just. I just think they needed a centre back massively.
Yeah, I think so. Of experience as well. Like that's important.
Definitely.
Yeah,
definitely. I think there were players that we mentioned last year that, like the likes of Tiedemann Mengi, who went down with Luton. I was surprised he didn't move on, to be honest, because he looked great for Luton last year, and I said, I think he'd be a good signing.
They're struggling in the Championship. Why not go
you've
back
got
for
Kieran
him?
McKenna in there who knows all about him, and Luton obviously struggling. Luton fans won't be liking us talking about this, but I think they need to make a signing in January.
Yeah, agreed.
I hope that they're still around here. They just need to get a win, don't they, under their belt?
Moving back to Brentford and Mbeumo in particular, obviously any questions about Tony leaving the club have been dispelled, I think, by Visser and him and their link up. But his movement in from the right is becoming kind of almost like world class. Like the way he floats in from the right hand side is almost Mo Salah-esque, I think. And I don't want to sell their players ahead of their time, but he seems like the kind of player that Liverpool would look at and go, yeah, he's a replacement for Salah long term, because he's only, I think, 24, isn't he? I mean, he looks like a man who's been through a lot. He looks older than 24, but he's so skilled. Like, I think everything he's brought to Brentford this season, and it's been building up from when they were in the Championship. He's been with them a while now, but he's kind of grown and matured with them. Has he outgrown Brentford, do you think?
I don't like to say he's outgrown them, because I think that might be a little bit disrespectful to say. I think in terms of if he's looking to make a step up, and obviously look to play at a high level in terms of, Champions League football, European football, then perhaps so. Like, I think he's proven it that so far this season. He's probably taken this step up, and he's proven that he's the guy now at that club. And he's their talisman. I do agree with you. I think it feels so much like I think Tottenham were linked with him in the summer about a potential move, but it does feel very much like a Diogo Jota kind of signing for me, doesn't it? I think he could
maybe, but I would argue that he's in the same position as Thomas Frank. Like, Brentford's the best place for him right now, like for his career. Like I say, he's still quite young. He's still got a lot of football to play, so at least give it another season or two before he realises that he's done all he can with Brentford. I still think Brentford can push for European football at some point in the next couple of years. They've got such a collective of players that work so well together. I think he'd be silly at the minute, and Mbeumo, to look elsewhere. I don't think he is, but there'll be talk about it if he continues the way he is, because he's played so well. Second in the top scorers now behind Erling Haaland with 8 goals. So, he's prolific, and he's that kind of player that will find himself in those positions regularly. I think he'll smash kind of 15, 20 goals this season quite comfortably. And then there'll be questions asked of whether he's suitable for Brentford. I don't think he needs to go anywhere. I think he's in the right place for him right now. Don't you?
Yeah, well, I don't have any doubts. I think he can play at probably a top 6 club. I mean, I'd happily see him at United, to be honest. I've seen a lot of good things from him. He's always a threat, so direct, running at players. It's what you want to see. You want those players who just get you on the edge of your seat. And he's put the numbers up this season, and he's really he's known that he's had to step up in the absence of Tony, and he's done that. I just think Brentford probably need to make a couple more signings that probably to keep the likes of Mbeumo at the club, just to show that they're looking to, make that next step really. And I think West Ham, Brighton over the last couple of years getting to that stage where they can get into Europe.
You mentioned Brighton there. I'm going to move on to them nicely next, just to finish the pod. Because their game against Wolves, which finished 2-2, again, another really entertaining game, and a late equaliser for Wolves through that man, Acuna, again, who's been so clutch for Wolves this season. But a quick word on Brighton. Obviously, they've had a very good start to the season. This will be a really disappointing loss of points, I think, for Hurtela. I think he said after the game he's disappointed to have thrown away a 2-0 lead. But let's talk about one player in particular who's kind of enabling this form at the minute, and that's a player who's undergoing a great renaissance at the minute, and that's Danny Welbeck. Again, his goal-scoring return this season is like something you'd see from a 19, 20-year-old coming up through the ranks. But this is a seasoned pro who's been around the block, and he's coming good. What is it about this Brighton setup, do you reckon, that gets the best out of Welbeck at the minute? Because he's been great.
First of all, it's the two golden oldies, Chris Wood and Danny Welbeck, leading the way in the Premier League.
And Jamie Vardy too, if you put him in there too. He scored this weekend. But yeah, those three like proper old school kind of strikers, aren't they?
Yeah. I think there's another thing you can say. I think he's got that base in that team where he's got quite a lot of youth around him that will do the running for him. If you look at the likes of Jorginho Ruto's come in, I think he's played really well and he's got a great idea and great sense of movement with and without the ball. Seems to pick up those spaces really nicely. I think that actually has allowed Welbeck a little bit more space in the box at times, but I think he's operated a little bit further upfield, to be honest. It doesn't seem to be dropping in as much, and if you look at the majority of his goals, I think a lot of them are great finishes. They've been in and around the 6-yard box.
Superb.
So I think he's occupied them spaces a lot more this season. And I think you've got to give credit to the manager for that, because he looks like he's pinpointed that. And I don't think it's any coincidence that he's come in now and he's putting up the numbers that he is. He's going to probably have on course for his best goal-scoring season in his career.
I think
he keeps going the rate he's going.
I think it's taking the pressure off Evan Ferguson, who obviously scored his first goal for nearly a year for Brighton in this game as well. And I think having that kind of experience, and obviously it helps that he's scoring too in Danny Welbeck, has kind of given Ferguson that breathing space, because he's been long talked about as the next big thing. Talking about where he's going to move to next. It was kind of premature, really, because he's still such a young guy. So, yeah, credit to Fabian Herzler, really, for kind of making sure that the focus of the attack has been Welbeck. And he can then almost like mentor Ferguson in how to finish, because that's been what it's been like this season. He's shown Ferguson how to finish in those clinical 6-yard box moments. I think Ferguson can only reap the benefits of that. Good to see him scoring in this game. I think that's been a massive monkey off his back, hasn't it? Ferguson scoring after so long without a goal. It's bound to have a toll on his confidence, but he's never really been short of confidence either. So it's just a case of biding his time and it will come, and it has. And yeah, a great strike, like you're saying.
Yeah, still so young, isn't he? And I just think he's definitely at the right club. Like, you look at some of those players that are coming through now, I think that must be probably the youngest team in the Premier League. There's so many young players. You forget the likes of like Buonanotte, who's on loan at Leicester this season, who I think played 40 games for Brighton last year. I was really surprised to go on, but they've brought in younger players. Ayari, who's come in and only 21 years of age, starting in that midfield. They've just got this great eye for talent, and I just think that's why Brighton is such a attractive proposition for some of these players. But also, keeping those experienced players around like Lewis Dunk and Danny Welbeck, who are kind of there as to guide them through those tough spells, which Evan Ferguson obviously went through. But it's great to see him on the score sheet again.
And obviously, before we wrap up Wolves as well, an important point for them. They've shown a bit of fight in the last couple of games. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, Cunha has been central to that. A great goal, but really, Brighton should have punished Wolves really in those last few minutes, shouldn't they? It was 4v1, and then the attack was just given away to the last man who played the ball through, obviously, to Cunha, who finished off brilliantly. Yeah, Wolves would be pleased with that point, won't they, against the backdrop of a very, very good Brighton team. And when it looked like it could have been curtains for them after that attack, that could have been it.
I think that'll give them like so much relief, but also I think in terms of the way that they actually rescued that point. Yeah. Especially obviously how the last game ended against Man City, where they were just so unfortunate not to get something out of that. I think that will do a lot, give them a lot of belief in the next game. And Gary O'Neill, I think, will be over the moon with that point.
Definitely. Well, they've got a decent run of games now.
Yeah, and I think we were a little bit worried about him actually over the last run of games, and they've just gone through a real tough time. It's good to see. Hopefully, he keeps his job. Fingers crossed. And
seems
they can turn it around because they've got the players there to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they could do with a centre-back, I think. They've not really replaced Kilman, have they, adequately, I don't think. So they could do with replacing him. But they've got players like Aït-Nouri who've performed brilliantly, and obviously Cunha as well. So I think there's talent there. But that's about all we've got time for, Dave, for this week's pod. Apologies to fans of Chelsea, of Everton, of Villa, of Palace. We haven't talked about your teams. Man City fans, I couldn't care less about you, but we'll move on from that. Dave, it's a brave new era for Manchester United. We've got a new coach on the horizon, hopefully. So maybe maybe podcast might get a bit more positive for me and you. Hey, let's hope.
Fingers crossed, yeah.
Fingers absolutely crossed. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please do tune in as always wherever you can and hit like, subscribe and follow on all our social channels at Football Diary UK. And obviously on YouTube, where we gain the most traction, have the most interaction with fans. Please do follow us on there too. Until next week, Dave, and this brave new dawn that's in front of us, I'll speak to you soon.
See you again.
Cheers, mate.